Ukrainian drones continue to smoke Russian refineries, and the president's sanctions continue to crush Russian oil companies. Just how bad are things looking for the Russian economy? And is even a U.S. adversary getting on board? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this one, right? So the headline is something that has been really recurrent almost every week. There are new stories about Ukrainian long-range drones striking Russian oil refineries. And the part that you got to laugh at is one that for literally years, long-range Russian drones have been hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and the Ukrainians have been largely prohibited by their allies, including the United States, of striking back. And that was a policy under Biden that continued under Trump. And now Ukraine is finally saying, listen, if you're not going to help us, we're going to do this. And so now Russia is getting a taste of its own medicine, realizing that, damn, this is kind of fucked. So you can see that another major Russian oil refinery has been struck, the Saratov refinery. Again, in some cases, there's even reports of fairly large explosions, and even in some cities, power outages from different drone strikes. But this is Russia's oldest and one of its largest oil refineries, putting out 4.8 million tons a year. And the appeal of targeting oil refineries is that oil does this thing where it explodes. And so particularly refineries. So these drones, which carry, relatively small warheads, if they can target, again, refined product storage, you can create really large explosions and very persistent fires. They are unbelievably vulnerable to drone strikes. It's really pretty asymmetric because Ukraine, as one of their largest exports is grain. You can blow up a grain silo and you won't even destroy all the grain in that silo. It's night and day in terms of vulnerability to these drone strikes. But the damage isn't just from long-range Ukrainian drones, because President Trump's sanctions are actually getting China on board, which is, by the way, guys, that is insane. Because remember, China is a massive financial and logistical supporter of Russian aggression. They want Russia to continue its war in Ukraine. So the fact that Chinese refiners are cutting Russian oil imports as U.S. sanctions are ready to roll out is insane, right? These are, by the way, guys, in China, in a critical industry like oil and gas, no decision is made without at least the acquiescence of the Chinese Communist Party. So the fact that state-owned oil giants like Sinopec and PetroChina are already canceling shipments of Russian oil. Smaller refineries are following suit, fearing they could be hit by sanctions, right, including some countries that are blacklisted by Britain and the European Union. The buyer strike has affected nearly 45% of Russia's crude exports to China, which is absolutely wild. That is a huge number, and slashing Russia's, really the number one buyer of Russian oil is China. And the fact that half of that is now being hit with sanctions is wild. Now, supposedly to attract buyers, Russia is just slashing prices, but that itself isn't that helpful, right? Discounts are now 50 cents a barrel compared with a $1 premium in October. Several Indian refiners are also suspending Russian imports. However, India has actually resumed purchases of crude oil from suppliers that have not been directly targeted by U.S. restrictions, despite the 50% Trump tariff on those on those products, or on India at large, right? Now, overall, this has had a pretty gnarly effect. You can see here is the 5-day crude oil price, right? You can see it's sort of bouncing around. But when you look at the last 12 months, you can see crude oil is, and this is denoted in USD, gone from 71 a barrel to 61 a barrel. That's a 15% decline. And that's a real problem because remember, this is the overall price. This isn't Russian profits, right? So if you're Russia and you're only getting $61 a barrel, let's say it costs you $30 to ship it out, and you have to knock off another 50% on your premium, you're talking about a massive decline in price. Remember, here is the oil spike from the initial invasion, trading at nearly twice this amount, peaking at $120 a barrel. Now it's down literally by 50% from the spike following the initial invasion. And you can see even in 2023, it was trading at $90 a barrel. So a 35% decline. Huge problems. And you can see that even OPEC is trying to mitigate this somewhat, trying to, just moderate their oil output increases. But there's definitely no talk of OPEC restricting oil refining. And you can see even when denoted in Russian rubles, a currency that has lost considerable value over the last year, major Russian oil companies. And remember, these are the thing, because the Russian government can't fund its war machine through debt. No one's willing to buy it. They're heavily sanctioned, and they're an extremely risky economy. They have no choice but to fund their war through oil revenues. And you can see that is on the decline, right? 12 months ago, Lukoil trading at 6,800 rubles, now trading at 5,500 rubles. And in the same 12 months where the nominal price has declined 18%, tack on an additional 15 to 20% for the Russian ruble's inflation, which again, the Russian central bank even has to admit, despite a falling economy, inflation is continuing to ramp up beyond their targets. Rosneft has even worse time. They're down 35% in absolute terms. And again, tack on that 15% ruble decline, and you have an absolute crisis level event for the Russian war machine. So again, while on the front line, it can feel like the Russian war machine is on the mark, place things in context. Taking over a destroyed city of 30,000 troops or of 60,000 residents is in no way analogous to the level of damage being dealt to the Russian economy. And remember, the victim of this is the Russian consumer and the Russian business owner. And those are two constituents that Putin needs, if not in his corner, at least willing to be totally apathetic. He needs them to not be opposed to the war. Because once they are, all bets are off for old Vladimir Putin, right? Just knowing that large segments of the Russian public aren't going to mind if he gets booted out is bad news for a dictator. Anyway, guys, hit subscribe. Thanks to Alfred Chesky Allen, that's in Christine Schumann, Dan Oppenheimer, and all of our Lieutenant Tier members. We couldn't do it without you guys. Hit subscribe. See you in the next one. Cheers.